just so folks know, we're here at the request of the council to primarily.
Excuse me, can you speak up just a little bit?
We're here I'm here at the request of the council primarily to explain EPA's rationale behind the Parrot Tailings portion of the selected remedies record of decision for the Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit, and also explain a little bit about some of the new data that's come out and what EPA's position is on that, and the additional things we're doing to continue to gather more information on that subject, on groundwater in the area and how the remedy is performing and what issues people have. There have been a lot of questions raised regarding the selected remedy, regarding the implementation of the remedy, and the situation with the groundwater. So what I wanted to do first was just kind of run through once again for folks the selected remedy in the 2006 record of decision, which is EPA's document for identifying the cleanup for a particular operable unit or site, of which the Parrot Tailings is one piece. So I just wanted to kind of run through for folks and remind that the Butte Priority, just what the Butte Priority Soils Operable Unit consists of, mostly the town proper and all the impacts within the area, as well as groundwater, contaminated groundwater and surface water. And the selected remedy also incorporated a lot of work that was done up until 2006 under the removal program, quicker actions to address mine waste piles and tailings and things like that. And then just a map on everybody's, I would guess that most of the folks in the room are familiar with what the Butte Priority Soils area consists of. And then the major components of the record of decision included the residential metals abatement program and Silverbolt Creek sediment and stream bank tailings removal, cleanup of surface water and stormwater. Incidentally, this piece is the piece that includes a contingency for, or at least currently considered, includes a contingency for treatment of stormwater if we can't achieve surface water standards in Silverbolt Creek. And then groundwater collection and treatment, and some of the other solid media covers. And as most of you guys know, all these elements include fairly large efforts for either, like for the solid media, it includes capping, removals, partial treatment. Then there's the syndicate pit reclamation, Granite Mountain Memorial Interpretive Area, and monitoring and institutional controls that will go on for a long time. These next couple of slides were just, I think this was 1955, and kind of lays out the area of some of the components of the remedy, the collection system in lower area 1, the metro storm drain collection system, and the location of the Parrot Tailings that we're here to talk a little bit about tonight. And then the next slide is just a more recent, this is what was this, Sarah, 1985?
2005.
What was it?
2005.
2005 map with the location of some of those remedy elements on it. So what we're here to talk about is the Parrot Tailings. What about the Parrot Tailings? The rationale in the remedy for leaving the Parrot Tailings in place had to do with a technical impracticability evaluation that we did back at the time, where we tried to look, it's a mouthful, and basically all it is it's a look at if we take certain actions, how effective will that be at restoring groundwater within a reasonable time frame to meet basically to standards. And that's kind of what we looked at. We looked at the time frame, how long it would take, if the Parrot Tailings and a lot of the associated sources in the area were removed, and we look at the cost of that, as well as how long it would take, what other sources of contaminated groundwater are in the area. We looked at the requirements, how long we're going to have to continue to collect and treat contaminated groundwater, and then we've got some. We've also got some additional groundwater studies, monitoring, and evaluations that have continued to occur since the time of the record of decision in 2006. So, and so based on the information and technical and practicability evaluation, we estimated even with some of the conservative assumptions that it would take at least 100 years for that groundwater to be restored, even if you remove the Parrot Tailings. And so, and the difference without removing them versus removing them is it's going to take about this. It would take about the same amount of time. We're going to have to collect and treat contaminated groundwater for a long time. So that's why the decision was made to cap in place and or to close in place and look at some other options. I'll get to a little bit of what we're looking at further. Some of the ongoing groundwater and surface water monitoring continues to demonstrate that we are, through the actions that we're taking, through the cleanup actions identified in the record of decision, that both surface water quality especially is continuing to improve, and we've seen, even more recently, we've seen some improvements with some recent actions in the butte reduction works. We had an effort in there that we'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation there. And basically what we're seeing as far as the surface water monitoring in Silverbow Creek is that the water quality has improved and continued to improve with the actions that we're taking. Having said all that, I should have caveated this presentation with, there's a lot of technical slides in this presentation, and I don't intend to spend a whole lot of time on the technical slides because I think there are other opportunities to do that. There's probably even some slides in here that are new and have some new data that haven't gone through a lot of the process that we typically go through in terms of involving the state and other parties and having everybody have their say. The issue of groundwater is always a complicated issue. It's never that simple when you're talking about groundwater and heterogeneity of the aquifer and where things are going and how fast they move and where they move. And so, as you might get, as you know from just all the folks that are interested in this topic, there's a lot of viewpoints, a lot of disagreements about the interpretation of what the data show. And so we continue to have those ongoing discussions as we collect new data and try and determine what other things we need to do to answer the questions with respect to, basically with respect to how well are we doing on, how well is the cleanup performing, are we accomplishing the objectives in the record of decision. And so, though I just wanted to, I'm not going to plan to spend a whole lot of time on these technical slides. They're there in the presentation. If you have questions on it later, we can probably bring that up with some of the more technical folks from the various stakeholders that are involved in the process. But I wanted to kind of give you a general...
Where is SSO7? Where is that located?
Sarah, where's SSO7?
It's down in lower area 1 at the end of our collection system.
Just
So by what street, Sarah?
Okay, so near the bridge on the interstate, Townsend Packing.
Where the Metro Sewer Plant now falls
Exactly.
in. Okay.
Sorry, yes, you would know about that.
So some of these slides were in just to show where some of the surface water data are coming in and what the standard is. One of the things to keep in mind, our overall objective really was to make sure we're trying to achieve standards in Silverbow Creek, because that is really the point at which we have the receptors, the environmental, and no human health receptors other than incidental contact, but that's primarily what we're trying to improve. The groundwater itself, the technical evaluation we conducted before the record of decision resulted in a decision that we weren't going to be able to achieve standards in groundwater within a reasonable time frame, and so we actually implemented a waiver of the groundwater standards beneath much of the site, because we just don't think we're going to get there, even if we just don't think it's possible to get there. So what we're focused on is trying to prevent that contaminated groundwater from getting to the creek in concentrations that would continue to degrade surface water. So we think we can get there with surface water quality. Groundwater, we're not going to be there for a long, long time, so we're going to be collecting and treating groundwater for a long, long time. As I said, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on some of these slides. We debated about whether or not to even pull these out. I thought I'd put them in there for your information if you guys want to look at it later. We sent the presentation electronically to Carol at NRDP, and we sent it to the state, and we can make that available to anybody who's interested.
What does BRW refer to?
Butte Reduction Works.
Okay.
One of the things I did on this presentation was, we had some of the technical folks put it together, and there's a lot of jargon in some of the slides with the description and the verbiage. I tried to remove some of those acronyms, some of those abbreviations, but it's still going to be on a lot of the figures and diagrams. Once again, these are just some diagrams showing, and it tells you these are base flow conditions, not storm events. We still got a lot of work to do yet on surface water and dealing with storm events and trying to manage surface water. We are not at a point where we have fully implemented all the elements of the record of decision. As a matter of fact, we just issued a unilateral order for remedial design and remedial action to try and get the remaining components of the remedy in place. So we continue to monitor at both base flow and during storm events. There's a lot of, and we'll go into that a little later, all the monitoring that we're continuing to do. This just kind of goes through both dissolved copper and total recoverable. Part of the reason we're looking at both state standards are total recoverable. The federal aquatic water criteria are, federal water quality criteria are dissolved phase. So a lot of this information, we can look at it and we can talk about it a little bit later. This is just a diagram of where the Parrot Tailings are with respect to the metro storm drain groundwater collection system. The current status. I'll also caveat some of the language here. Obviously, as most of you know, there is not full agreement on some of the statements that we're making here. The state has some concerns about the statements we're making here, how well we're doing with respect to meeting standards. Other parties out there have some concerns as well, and that's the reason that we continue with the ongoing studies and trying to collect more information. But where we are here, this first statement about meeting state standards at Silverboat Creek, that's for most of the total recoverable metals. I mean, we still have problems meeting total recoverable copper in stream, and we're still working. And as I said, we've still got some remedy elements with respect to stormwater events that we've got to get in place to try and minimize some of the impacts there. This is the work in the Butte Reduction Works area where we have done some recent studies to try and identify additional groundwater contamination loading to surface water there, and identified some areas and actually constructed some ponds into that groundwater to collect that groundwater for treatment and maintain the level in those ponds at a level lower than the creek to basically keep that contaminated groundwater from continuing to flow to the creek. And then, of course, these are the concerns that we have heard from a lot of parties is that we may be missing some of the contamination, or are there areas where there's still significant loading to the creek from contaminated groundwater, and then I'll talk about some of the studies that we're doing now to try and continue to identify whether there are gaps in the collection systems. How much are we missing? How likely is it that contamination is going to get to the creek in the future that could cause us continued problems with meeting surface water quality standards? And these are some of the studies that we've been implementing and are underway since the record of decision. There's a whole list of them here. It's kind of small print on this slide, but I'll kind of go through. I kind of have some slides that go through each of them individually with some of the goals for each of those studies. And really, this comes out of the questions that have arisen regarding the decision to leave, well, among others, to leave contaminants in place, cap contaminants in place, and collect and treat contaminated groundwater. And so all these studies are one mechanism of trying to get at and answer the questions of how much are we missing, are there areas where we need to take additional action, are there things where we've missed it and we need to collect it. So I'll start with the tracer test that was done, the Metro Storm Drain tracer test, basically looking at loading into the Metro Storm Drain. One of these was basically looking at, where are we getting loading into the storm drain? Where are additional sources of groundwater contamination? And this final report is actually out there. And then there's other studies with respect to the pumping test. And this is a key one that a lot of folks have picked up on. This pumping test was really to look at some of the places where people had concerns about whether or not some of the assumptions that went into the evaluation, the technical and practicability evaluation, whether or not those assumptions were valid, whether there were problems with them. And we did find that indeed the hydraulic conductivity in the middle zone beneath the Parrot Tailings was considerably higher than what we thought prior to the rod. I think it's been like an order or two of magnitude higher than what we had in one of the zones beneath the Parrot Tailings. So, and that's out there in the report. Why we didn't feel like that data point by itself invalidated the modeling that was done is because there's a lot of other things that go into. There's a lot of other inputs to the modeling that was done. And really, what the way the modeling worked was, the assumption was made that we would remove the Parrot Tailings, and then it was looking at how long it would take to flush those contaminants through. So as you can imagine, the hydraulic conductivity, how porous the aquifer, or how well water flows through the aquifer, makes a difference in how long it's going to take. But it's not just the hydraulic conductivity. It also involves the gradient. If you have a really high hydraulic conductivity and no gradient, the water's not moving through it either. So it's both things. And one of the things that was found that there was more of a vertical gradient. Also, the attenuation assumptions, the modeling that was done back for the technical and practicability evaluation assumed basically no attenuation, which basically means it would clean up in the fastest time. If you had any attenuation, in other words, if any of the metals were absorbed onto the soil matrix, that would slow down the time frame that it would take, or lengthen the time it would take to actually meet standards in groundwater. So that's another factor that goes into there. And the heterogeneity of the aquifer. Are you going to be able to, does it all have that same hydraulic conductivity, or are there zones in there that are less conductive and that take longer to clean up? So that this highlights some of the uncertainty that you deal with when you're looking at modeling and the assumptions you put into modeling. But having said that, we do have this data point that indicates a higher hydraulic conductivity. That by itself doesn't invalidate the technical and practicability evaluation, but it does raise some questions that we need to answer. That's one of the reasons that we continue to monitor and we continue to perform studies to determine, to try and get some answers to some of these questions with respect to groundwater. The isolation test for the Metro Storm Drain, this was basically one to try and see whether or not the Metro Storm Drain was pulling in clean water from clean areas, like from the down gradient side, near Blacktail, on the Blacktail Creek side, and basically mixing clean water with contaminated groundwater and increasing the amount of groundwater you have to treat. And so we were looking at that to see if there are ways that we can segregate that clean water and keep the clean water from becoming more contaminated and then having to treat more water. So that was one of the things we looked at. Infiltration barriers evaluation. This is required as part of the record of decision, and it's in the current order that we need to go through a process